One of the biggest and most famous private equity deals of recent years was the takeover by Terra Firma, headed by Guy Sands of EMI Records, the famous owners of the Abbey Road studios. This is a deal that will go down in history as being pretty well awful, and the people who put their money into that deal, in truth, have lost pretty much all of it. Not only that, but they've just been asked to put their hands in their pockets again and put more money in to a fresh funding round. It's controversial. We have an expert on private equity at CAS, one of the leading academic thinkers in the subject, Guy Fraser-Sampson. He's just written another new book on the subject. I asked him for his take on the Terra Firma situation.
Well, EMI is a leveraged buyout transaction, and there are three basic drivers of buyout returns. There are earnings, the level of earnings within the company, the multiple which you apply to those earnings in order to arrive at a valuation, and then there's the use of debt or leverage. And I'm afraid EMI is a classic example of what happens when all three of those things go wrong together. The earnings have been hit by things that are happening in the marketplace, things like downloads and piracy, and also presumably by artist defections. The multiples clearly now are much lower than in the middle of 2007 when this deal was done. The price-earnings ratio then, if you look at the rolling 10-year figure, was at a historic high, much lower today. And then, of course, there's the problem of debt. We went through a period, particularly in 06 and the first part of 07, which we're now calling the Cov-Light period, where Cov-Light debt means the banks take less protection than they would otherwise have done, was readily available. And that had the effect, I think, of inflating the prices at which some of these buyouts got done.
So how can Guy Hand's Terra Firma have got this so wrong?
Well, I think it's difficult to criticize them in the sense that they were only doing what everybody else in the market was doing. As we went into the first part of 2007, we'd had a long bull market. Debt was readily available, it was relatively cheaply available, and everybody was paying up for their deals, because if you didn't pay up for your deals, you didn't do any deals. So I think it's very difficult to criticize them, even though in retrospect, clearly, as they themselves admit, they paid too much for the company. I think there are two things one might say. The first is they might have had a chance, perhaps, to be able to wriggle out of doing the deal, because the banks did try to withdraw their underwriting of the debt finance, and perhaps it would have been possible to go to the takeover panel and say, look, there's been a material adverse change in circumstances, can we stop, please? So perhaps they might have done that. But the other thing which I think they've got badly wrong is not really in respect of the deal itself, but in respect of their fund, because it appears that they've put a very large amount, both of this fund and their previous fund, into this deal. Some people are talking about 30% of the fund, and that would be extremely unusual. If you do that, then arguably you are betting your firm on one transaction.
How much time has this bought the investors in Terra Firma?
Well, what is being said is that it's bought them about a year, that it should guarantee that the company will not breach its banking covenants within the next year. But it is acknowledged that there will be a need for a larger funding round, perhaps £200 million or even more, in about a year to a year and a half's time. So the big question is, will the investors stump up that extra cash in addition to what they've already put in? Logically, they should, because logically there would have been no point in agreeing to this funding round unless they were prepared to go the whole hog.
If you were an LP, a limited partner in Terra Firma's fund, would you have agreed to the extra funding?
Well, I'm not an insider, so I don't know the full details, but I have to say, simply on the basis of the publicly available information, then no, I don't think I would. I think these turnaround situations are very, very difficult. I think, for one thing, you need the debt providers and the equity providers to be happy to work together towards a common end. And that is not the case here. On the contrary, the equity providers are suing the debt providers for fraud. So that's about as bad as you can get. I think I would also be concerned that there are things happening in EMI's marketplace which are beyond its control. And the other problem, which again has not perhaps received the prominence that it should, is that there now appears to be a big deficit opening up in the EMI pension fund, which, depending who you talk to, is anywhere between about £20 million and £200 million. And it is very unclear whether any need to plug that deficit, as the pension regulator might order, has been taken into account in the funding calculations. So I think it's a difficult situation, but I think my inclination would have been to bite the bullet and walk away from it.
But presumably if they had bitten the bullet and walked away from it, they would have waved goodbye to all the money they'd put in so far.
That's true, but it's a sunk cost. The equity value in EMI has effectively been written down to more or less zero. So that is a sunk cost, and I think it's a very bad idea to take investment decisions on the basis that you've lost some money, and therefore it's worth throwing some more money in to try and rescue it.
Are there other buyouts in EMI's position, and if so, how many?
Well, there was a report a year or so back that suggested there might be over 100 buyouts that were done at an enterprise value in excess of €1 billion. Now, the question is on exactly what terms was the debt granted on those transactions. We know that a lot of it is not due to mature until 2012 or 2013. So there is time perhaps to turn some of these situations around. But if we did get back into a double-dip recession, then things could get very ugly indeed. It's entirely possible there are buyout funds out there with, say, 2005 vintage year that will not return their capital. And to be fair, that's the first time that will ever have happened in the industry.
And presumably an awful lot of this could have been avoided if only they'd read your new book.
Well, it's certainly true that I've been writing since about 2005 that I thought we were heading into a mega buyout bubble. That's true. It's not true that in any way I could have anticipated the credit crunch. But I think it was obvious that there was a huge amount of capital piling into the marketplace, and high amounts of capital are the enemy of returns.
Guy Fraser-Sampson, thank you very much.